Hello and welcome to episode 286 of Stand Up. Joining me today, the legal eagle, Eric Segall, constitutional law professor at Georgia State University, and climate crisis journalist at Earther, Brian Kahn. I am Pete Dominic, coming at you. Time to stand up with me right now. Well, hello there, my friends, and welcome to episode 286. Thank you very much for joining me, coming at you from the shed in my backyard. That's where I broadcast each and every day until anything changes and I get a big van to drive all over the country and stay with you and your family at your house and hang out and play horseshoes and drink Budweiser. Do the podcast from your house. I mean, that's the dream. Seriously, that is the dream. I'm coming to your house someday with my podcasting equipment, with my microphones to tell your story. That's the ultimate future evolution of the program, hanging out with you. So thank you very much for hanging out with me today. The solar-powered law studios, Shed Studio, the Shedio, built by listener and subscriber Nick D. Fabrizio in the hottest days of summer. We put this baby together, and I am loving being here and the frosting of yet another snowfall on Tuesday here in the Northeast. We haven't had this much snow in years, and I'm thoroughly enjoying each and every flake. I'm not kidding you. I love it. I love it. I love it. Can't get enough. Growing up in Syracuse, New York, this is speaking to me. I know a lot of you are horrified by winter and winter weather, much less snow itself, but I'm really enjoying it. So keep it coming, baby. Keep it coming. Today, my daughter is supposed to be getting her permit, although we're expecting another snowstorm, and I'm going to try to convince my wife not to take her to get her permit. Anything I can do to prevent this girl from getting her driver's permit, I will put that obstacle in the way. I must continue to drive her everywhere she goes. That's the only time I get her without her undivided attention, without her phone. Because the car has always been a no phone zone. I highly encourage you to enforce that one rule. No phone zone in the cars. Don't let them take it out. Slap it out of their hand. Snatch it from them. Toss it out of the window if you must. But get that time. Doesn't mean you have to be in conversation. Maybe you play some music. Maybe you don't even talk. You're just with them in that space. A listener, friend recommended that to me, and I am paying it forward to you folks who have younger kids, driving them around. Enjoy the time you get to be with them. Ava is 16. Let's get to the news, shall we? This is a daily podcast. Each and every day, I put a robust, comprehensive news segment together for you. I know all the people in the news. I know how to look at the news and then give you my spin on the news. And you know who I always like to go to is Matt Kaiser at WTF Happened Today. I think he's fantastic. He always does a great recap. Today in one sentence, day 20 of the Biden presidency. He writes, the coronavirus variant first found in the UK is rapidly spreading across the U.S. The House asked the Biden administration to release documents related to the Trump administration's response to the coronavirus pandemic. Congressional Democrats are expected to propose providing up to $3,600 per child to families as part of Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package. Biden's proposal to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour would result in 1.4 million job losses, but lift 900,000 Americans out of poverty by 2025 and raise the income for 17 million people. Poverty experts, by the way, say raising the minimum wage is the best thing, the most important thing you can do to help folks get out of poverty. Biden, citing Trump's, quote, erratic behavior unrelated to the insurrection, said Trump should not receive intelligence briefings, and Trump's attorneys argued that the insurrection at the Capitol was perpetrated by people of their own accord and for their own reasons, and not because Trump called on them to march on Congress and, quote, fight like hell. So that is yesterday in a soundbite for you. The other thing about Trump's lawyers is apparently he hired a third lawyer who's like a personal injury lawyer, also happens to be Jewish, requested that even though the impeachment hearings begin today, that he gets Friday to observe the Sabbath sundown starting at 5 p.m. and they could pick up the hearings on Sunday. Okay, well, majority leader now in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, is Jewish. He gets that. Other senators agree and said they'd give this guy his religious observance. And then the guy said, you know what? Forget about it. I don't even worry about it. Thanks for offering, but I'm good, which is super confusing and nobody seems to be able to figure out. Nonetheless, impeachment hearings for the second impeachment era for the first president ever to be impeached twice begin today. Arguments about the constitutionality of it, arguments about the issues relating to freedom of speech. You've heard some of that all. I've got some sound bites for you. Let's start with Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer is the Senate Majority Leader. He's my senator here in New York State. I live in Rockland County, Clarkstown, Congers, to be even more specific. If you're passing through, stop by the deck, trudge through the snow, say hello, or don't. I mean, text me first. That would be really weird. Anyway, here is Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor, laying it out in about 3 minutes, concisely, accurately. I think this is a really well-done floor speech. Here is my senator, Chuck Schumer.
Prominent conservative Republican constitutional lawyer, Chuck Cooper, wrote in the Wall Street Journal that Republicans are dead wrong if they think an impeachment trial of a former president is unconstitutional. Here's what he wrote, quote, given that the Constitution permits the Senate to impose the penalty of permanent disqualification only on former office holders, it defies logic to suggest that the Senate is prohibited from trying and convicting former office holders. The senators who supported Mr. Paul's motion should reconsider their view and judge the former president's misconduct on the merits. That's no liberal. That's Chuck Cooper, a lawyer who represented House Republicans in a lawsuit against Speaker Pelosi, a former advisor to Senator Cruz's presidential campaign, driving a stake into the central argument we're going to hear from the former president's counsel. Now, I understand why this fringe constitutional theory is being advanced. For the past few weeks, the political right has been searching for a safe harbor, a way to oppose the conviction of Donald Trump without passing judgment on his conduct, to avoid alienating the former president's supporters, without condoning his obviously despicable, unpatriotic, undemocratic behavior. But the truth is, no such safe harbor exists. The trial is clearly constitutional by every frame of analysis, by constitutional text, historical practice, Senate precedent, and basic common sense. A president cannot simply resign to avoid accountability for an impeachable offense, nor can they escape judgment by waiting until their final few weeks in office to betray our country. The impeachment powers assigned to the Congress by the Constitution cannot be defeated by a president who decides to run away or trashes our democracy on the way out the door. This trial will confirm that fact. The merits of the case against the former president will be presented, and the former president's counsel will mount a defense. Ultimately, senators will decide on the one true question at stake in this trial. Is Donald Trump guilty of inciting a violent mob against the United States? A mob whose purpose was to interfere with the constitutional process of counting electoral votes and ensuring a peaceful transfer of power. And if he is guilty, does someone who would commit such a high crime against their own country deserve to hold any office of honor or trust ever again? Consistent with the solemn oath we have all taken to do impartial justice according to the Constitution and laws of the United States, that is the question every senator must answer in this trial. I yield the floor.
The Schumer yielding the floor. The Schuman, cousin of Amy Schumer, who was mentored by me. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, so that's Chuck Schumer. I made myself laugh. That was an authentic moment where I laughed at myself, my own joke. Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor yesterday. Let's go to Congresswoman Jackie Speier. She represents California's 14th district in the House and has a crazy life story. She entered politics serving as a congressional staffer for a congressman named Leo Ryan, and she was part of his fact-finding mission from late 1978, November 1978, organized to investigate allegations of human rights abuses by Jim Jones, cult leader Jim Jones and his People's Temple followers, almost all of whom were American citizens who'd moved to a place in South America, Jonestown, Guyana, with Jim Jones in 1977, 1978. And several members of the cult ambushed the investigative team and others who were boarding the plane. 5 people died, including Congressman Ryan, and now Congressman Jackie Speier, who you're about to hear from, was trying to shield herself from rifle and shotgun fire behind the small airplane wheels with other team members, and she was shot 5 times and waited 22 hours before help arrived. That day, 900 remaining members of the People's Temple, that cult, died in a mass murder-suicide, and then she lived through the insurrection on the Capitol, and now here she is making a case against Donald Trump on MSNBC yesterday.
So many of my colleagues to put into words that every American can hear for decades to come, how close we came to losing our democracy. You know, Andrea, I think what gets lost in all of this is the fact that President Trump basically told that mob to go to the Capitol, to the Congress of the United States, to the branch of government, the equal branch of government that was about to do its job relative to the Electoral College. And he told them to fight like hell. Fight like hell meant overtaking the legislative branch of government. And we can't lose sight of that. He also said in his remarks later in the day, much later in the day, remember this day forever. This is a man that intended to overtake this government. And it's astonishing to me that so few of my colleagues on the Republican side, even after witnessing that, even after being part of that insurrection, are unwilling to do their jobs and protect the Constitution and protect the democracy.
Jackie Speier of California, I'd interviewed her over at Sirius XM. I should reach out to get her on the show. I should do a whole week of congressional representatives. You like that idea? Let me know. Okay, so you're going to hear arguments about the constitutionality of impeachment. And, of course, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said, we have to wait until the president can't impeach him while he's here. And then he said once he was gone, he's gone. He can't impeach him. He tried to have it both ways is the point. So you're going to hear an argument about constitutionality, and then you're going to hear free speech arguments. And let's just go back to the first impeachment when you heard so many Republican congressmen said, we should not be impeaching the president. Let's let the American people speak for themselves at a free and fair election in November. We shouldn't be impeaching the president and speaking for the American people. Here's a whole bunch of Republicans at the first impeachment of Donald Trump saying, let's let the American people just vote in the election that we're going to deny and try to overthrow and not speak for them. Listen to this.
I would say let the voters decide.
I mean, let the voters decide this stuff.
The voters are voting, and it is up to the voters to decide.
It's better to let the people decide.
The answer is an election, not an impeachment.
Oh, okay. You just want us to vote. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and we'll vote. And we did vote, and we overwhelmingly voted him out, and you did not accept it. And like the vast majority of you just decided that you were not going to accept our votes and then tried to overthrow the election, and then there was a violent insurrection on the United States Capitol. Come on, son. Come on. This is impeachment number 2. The argument that they are going to be making is going to be about free speech. Here is Floyd Abrams, who is one of the most respected lawyers on free speech. He's been doing it for a while. He's an advocate for free speech. He's 175 years old, and he is a legend and an icon in constitutional law circles and about free speech. He and 144 other lawyers and litigants and experts on the First Amendment said that the First Amendment defense that Trump's lawyers are going to be mounting in the impeachment trial in the Senate is, quote, legally frivolous. And they took aim at the key plank of former president's impeachment defense. And they argued in this letter that the constitutional protections did not apply to an impeachment proceeding. They argued even if the First Amendment did apply to an impeachment trial, it would do nothing to bar conviction, which has to do with whether Mr. Trump violated his oath, not whether he should be allowed to say what he said. Quote, no reasonable scholar or jurist could conclude that President Trump had a First Amendment right to incite a violent attack on the seat of the legislative branch, or then sit back and watch on television as Congress was terrorized and the Capitol sacked. That's what they wrote. Floyd Abrams was on MSNBC with the great Chris Hayes. Chris Hayes asked Floyd Abrams, the legend, why the First Amendment doesn't apply in impeachment hearings. And here was his answer.
It doesn't apply because there are lots of things that a president or any of us can do that are protected by the First Amendment that could still lead to impeachment. I mean, suppose the president ran around burning an American flag saying, I have no intention of protecting the people of the United States. He took an oath to preserve and protect and defend the Constitution. If he starts saying, I won't do it, if he starts saying, I'm not loyal, to pick that example, of course he could be impeached.
And here is legendary free speech advocate Floyd Abrams making the case more specifically on MSNBC with Chris Hayes last night.
I mean that when the president started out for some time falsely saying that the election had been stolen, tells people to go to Washington and tells them it'll be wild when they get there, gives a speech to them, leading them to go to the Capitol, telling them to go to the Capitol, telling them they have to be strong and not weak, telling them they will lose the country. The country will be lost to them unless they win this. When you add all the different things up he said in the context in which he said it, he was inciting them not only to go, but to do something. And the only thing that they could do in that circumstance that would fit what he was saying was the sort of violence that we saw.
All right. Also on MSNBC, I saw yesterday they were replaying some of Adam Schiff's closing argument against Trump in the first impeachment, and I wanted to reshare that with you because I thought it was pretty powerful.
He's guilty as sin, but why not let the voters clean up this mess? And here, to answer that question, we must look at the history of this presidency and to the character of this president, or lack of character, and ask, can we be confident that he will not continue to try to cheat in that very election? Can we be confident that Americans and not foreign powers will get to decide, and that the president will shun any further foreign interference in our democratic affairs? And the short, plain, sad, incontestable answer is no, you can't. You can't trust this president to do the right thing, not for 1 minute, not for one election, not for the sake of our country. You just can't. He will not change, and you know it.
And, of course, you know what happened next. Of course, COVID was out of control. And you know, obviously, if the Republicans in the Senate would have impeached him, they might have gotten it under better control. Lives might have been saved. But more importantly, he would not have been able to ramp up this rigged election rhetoric. And then after the election, which was secure, then continued to say it. And become what is being referred now to expertly, I think, the big lie. I mean, he would, if they had only impeached him the first time, he would not have gotten away with destroying what little respect was left of our democracy, saying that the election was rigged. But they didn't. Only Mitt Romney. Only Mitt. Oh, God, I can't believe that Mitt Romney is our hero. Liz Cheney, John McCain, they're the brave souls in the Republican Party. All right, so also our reputation around the world has been terribly damaged by the Trump presidency and, most importantly, the questioning of our secure election. How can we go around projecting democracy on the rest of the world if we can't have a healthy one here at home? And that's exactly the question that Wolf Blitzer put to Joe Biden's Secretary of State, a guy named Anthony Blinken. I wanted you to hear from him. Not the most articulate guy, but makes a great case. Take it away, Wolf.
The president is facing a major challenge right now with the coup in Myanmar, where thousands of protesters have now taken to the streets. So how does the U.S., though, speak with authority on democracy when people around the world saw our capital attacked and our democratic institutions pushed to the brink?
Look, Wolf, there's no doubt that our ability to speak with that strong voice for democracy and human rights took a hit with what happened on January 6th that happened at the Capitol. But I got to tell you, I actually see the glasses half full on that, because we had a peaceful transition of power pursuant to our Constitution. The grievous assault on Congress, what happened? Members of Congress came back. They came back to the Senate. They came back to the House. They came back to the halls of Congress, and they did their job pursuant to the Constitution to ensure that we had a peaceful transition of power. You know this so well. Throughout our history, we've had incredibly challenging moments, and sometimes we've taken our own steps backward. But what's made us different is our willingness, our ability to confront these challenges with full transparency in front of the entire world. And that's very unlike other countries. When they face challenges, they try to sweep everything under the rug, ignore it, repress it, push it back. We're doing this all out in the open. Sometimes it's incredibly difficult. Sometimes it's ugly. But I think we have a very strong story to tell about the resilience of democracy, the resilience of our institutions, and the determination of this country to always try to form a more perfect union.
All right, Anthony Blinken, learn more about him. Read about that guy. He's a pretty interesting, smart fellow with quite a sterling record. Look it up. Unless I'm missing something, let me know. All right, let's move on to the White House briefing yesterday where Jen Psaki, Psaki, I think the P is silent, who was the former spokesman for Obama's Secretary of State. She's now the spokesman for Joe Biden himself, doing an excellent job by most accounts. Fox News' Peter Doocy, who is the son of Steve Doocy, who is on Fox and Friends. It's like a family affair over at Fox. What a weird nepotism right there. Anyway, Steve Doocy tried to be snarky with Jen Psaki, and Jen Psaki wrapped his balls up in a package and made Peter Doocy eat them. And I wanted to share that with you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. I do have a question on both of them. First on energy. When is it that the Biden administration is going to let the thousands of fossil fuel industry workers, whether it's pipeline workers or construction workers, who are either out of work or will soon be out of work because of a Biden EO, when it is and where it is that they can go for their green job? And that is something the administration has promised. There is now a gap. So I'm just curious when that happens, when those people can count on that.
Well, I'd certainly welcome you to present your data of all the thousands and thousands of people who won't be getting a green job. Maybe next time you're here, you can present that.
But you said that they would be getting green jobs, so I'm just asking when that happens. Richard Trumka, who is a friend, longtime friend of Joe Biden, says about that day one Keystone EO, he says, I wish he, the president, had paired that more carefully with the thing that he did second by saying, here's where we are creating the jobs. So there's partial evidence from Richard Trumka.
Well, you didn't include all of his interview. Would you like to include the rest?
So how about this? The Laborers International Union of North America said the Keystone decision will cost 1,000 existing union jobs and 10,000 projected construction jobs.
Well, what Mr. Champaka also indicated in the same interview was that President Biden has proposed a climate plan with transformative investments in infrastructure and laid out a plan that will not only create millions of good union jobs, but also help tackle the climate crisis. And as the president has indicated when he gave his primetime address to talk about the American Rescue Plan, he talked about his plans to also put forward a jobs plan in the weeks or months following, and he has every plan to do exactly that.
But there are people living paycheck to paycheck. There are now people out of jobs once the Keystone Pipeline stopped construction. It's been 12 days since Gina McCarthy and John Kerry were here, and it's been 19 days since that EO. So what are these people who need money now? When do they get their green job?
Well, the president and many Democrats and Republicans in Congress believe that investment in infrastructure, building infrastructure that's in our national interests and that boosts the U.S. economy, creates good-paying union jobs here in America and advances our climate and clean energy goals are something that we can certainly work on doing together. And he has every plan to share more about his details of that plan in the weeks ahead.
There you go. Jen Psaki with Fox News' Peter Doocy, and I get into that issue with Earther's Brian Kahn coming up. But first, it is time, ladies and gentlemen, for today's news dump. Rapid fire headlines, not political, not COVID, but definitely undercovered. Here we go. Let's start with some news from Wall Street, where the Dow surged 237 points to a record high because Tesla stock jumped 11% after an announcement about Bitcoin. Stocks pushed more gains and record highs at Wall Street just as the market came off the biggest week since November. Investors keeping their focus on better than expected company earnings and the prospects for more economic stimulus to combat the impact of the coronavirus. That is according to the Associated Press. Also, Tesla climbed their stock after saying it bought $1.5 billion in Bitcoin and planned to allow customers to pay for electric vehicles with the digital currency. What? It's really time we probably learned about it. All right, so a Wall Street story, a financial story. Markets are doing well. Not that that's necessarily a good thing. Tom Brady, everybody's talking about Tom Brady today. He had the Vince Lombardi trophy, the Super Bowl trophy in his hand for 7th time on Sunday. But apparently he did not forget about his sponsors. Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback appeared to be covering up a Nike logo on his undershirt after he noticed it while taking questions on the podium, according to USA Today. The team's uniforms are made by Nike, who has a contract with the NFL, but Tom Brady is not with Nike. He's with Under Armour, and a lot of people that saw that were calling out the very brand-conscious move. A reverse Michael Jordan after Team USA won the 1992 Olympics. Michael Jordan, who then was with Nike, covered up the Reebok logo, according to Yahoo Sports. I thought that was interesting, worth mentioning on the news dump. How about this? It's being called a cultural embarrassment. Jamaica, the country of Jamaica, running low on weed because of rain, drought, pandemic, legalization. Fewer farmers all mean less weed on the island country. Heavy rains followed by an extended drought, increase in local consumption, and a drop in the number of actual marijuana farmers has caused a shortage in Jamaica's famed but largely illegal market that experts say is the worst they've ever seen. Wow, a cultural embarrassment, according to Tristan Thompson, who is the chief opportunity explorer for Takaya, which is a consulting brokerage firm for the country's legal cannabis industry. Wow, marijuana, Jamaica, a shortage of weed. Come on, man. Sorry, I'm so sorry that I just did that to you. Everybody now talking about I can't believe how many people I see on Twitter, at least, talking about the documentary Framing Britney Spears, which is airing on FX and Hulu. The saga continues to swirl around Britney Spears' conservatorship and the, quote, hashtag Free Britney movement. Apparently, the Free Britney movement is trying to help her get out of under control of her dad, who's the conservator of her estate, I guess. This new documentary, she's 39 now, Britney Spears, is shedding light on how she got to this place, and it's raised a lot of different issues, and I don't know why I'm even telling you this one, but it's just getting a lot of talk. CNN reporting that Framing Britney Spears, part of the New York Times Presents series, airing on FX and Hulu, takes a look at Britney Spears' career with the spotlight specifically on the sexism and misogyny that she's apparently endured throughout, including how sexualized she was even as a young pop star. So a lot of people talking about that, so I figured I'd mention it. And I think that it will end the news dump on Britney Spears. I really didn't want to word it that way. Sorry. Okay, I'm not editing it out. Let's get to my first guest today. How about that? All right. Very excited to welcome him back to the conversation. I read every single one of his columns. I have them favorited. I subscribe to the newsletter from earther.gizmodo.com, where my guest is the managing editor of Earther and always writing great pieces there. Recently, the Empire State Building runs on the wind. Exxon and Chevron reportedly considered becoming an oil-stained Voltron. QAnon congresswoman also believes a space laser sparked California's deadliest wildfire. This is how Joe Biden wins the climate messaging war. And much, much more with my guest, Brian Kahn, who, again, you should subscribe to the newsletter at Earther. You should follow Brian on Twitter at Brian Kahn. Oh, I'm sorry, at BL Kahn on Twitter, KAHN. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most important journalists writing about climate of our generation, Brian Kahn! Brian, first time we're talking since the inauguration, since Joe Biden took over. Great to see you. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm doing great. It feels like I'm looking at the sun again for the first time after 4 years of standing in darkness.
Yeah, I feel like one of the big questions, I'm going to get to your specific posts, all of which are always fascinating, important, interesting, and so well written. But I feel like the Georgia Senate runoff election is a real game changer for everything, but specifically, we're going to talk about climate legislation that might happen. What do you think that Senate election changed?
When you have control of the Senate, you have a much better chance at doing all sorts of climate legislation, whether it's big stuff like setting a clean electricity standard or smaller stuff like extending tax credits for electric cars and things like that. So it's a whole different world and way of thinking about it, with the caveat that, we still have to figure out how to appease people that are, not just Joe Manchin, but other, sort of middle of the road Democrats as well. And I think there are ways to do that. So I choose to be cautiously optimistic.
Good to hear. But you write about these issues, of course, at Earther, about changing coal jobs, because this is what needs to happen. Changing coal jobs, oil jobs, gas jobs to new employment, new industries, building renewable energy or sustainable construction, infrastructure. But how do we sell these integral initiatives, the Green New Deal or whatever you want to call it, to coal, oil, and gas industry and the hardworking Americans who currently work in those industries, in those jobs?
Yeah, I think, I will say with the caveat that, I don't live in those communities and work in those communities, right? I'm a writer that sits in New York. I work in a union job, which is great. So at least we can kind of relate in that level. But there's a certain degree of am I the right person to show up in those communities and tell them what to do? I don't think I am. But I will say that I think that there are messages and there are things that you can explain to them about the transition that will win them over, or that can at least start that dialogue of how do we get involved in this? Because at the end of the day, I think we're at the point now where everyone in this country, or not everyone, but a large portion of this country knows climate change is happening. And they understand that a transition to clean energy has to happen to basically stop the planet from being fried. So when we operate in that shared reality, then we need to start having these adult discussions of what does it look like for coal communities? What does it look like for, oil and gas workers? And that's where, when we think about this from a policy level, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to remediate these sites, fossil fuel sites, whether it's coal mines, coal plants, oil and gas wells, all this stuff needs to be cleaned up. And the people with the best skills to do that are the people that have been doing the digging or that have been extracting the oil. They have the skills that are perfectly suited to do this work that will last for decades. And so when, I look at them, I think, it's not just hey, we're going to give you a job installing solar panels on a roof. We're going to say, hey, you have skills that we need. Like, you have powered this country and we are thankful for that. And now we need you to help us get to a better place. The other thing is, like, at the end of the day, those communities are also dealing with the pollution, right? Like, the pollution doesn't just get outsourced. They are still breathing toxic air. They are still dealing with polluted waterways. And so when it gets down to it, you're not just asking them to, hey, do this thing for me, some guy living in New York in the Northeast. Like, I'm asking you to join in this thing that will help you clean up your own community and have a better way of life.
Well, forgive me, I wasn't suggesting that you necessarily go down there and do it, but what about someone like Gina McCarthy or John Kerry or someone that they can relate to, maybe some executive or salesman from a solar company that explains how important these jobs are and how much they would make? I'm not sure how they would sell it to them, but I think it needs to be sold. These new potential futures and careers for them. You've written a new piece about how important Joe Biden's messaging is on this. These folks are told that to make the changes that are necessary to fight the climate crisis, that their lives are going to take the brunt of it, that they're going to lose their job, their careers, which they find obviously a lot of purpose and integrity in. That's what they've been told for years. The truth is, a lot of economists predict that this will be a way better opportunity for so many families, making more money, having better benefits. But how do you sell that to them? What is the best way to message that to these folks that live in these communities working in oil, gas, and coal?
Yeah, I mean, I think those people are like, I like to think of them as like pro-humanity, right? Or pro-habitable Earth.
Hey, whatever works, whatever the focus groups say, I'll use it.
I mean, I think, at the end of the day, like, it really is about talking to people that this is not a choice we have to make of like jobs versus the environment. Like, the two things go hand in hand. Like, we live on planet Earth. That's the way it is. Like, we need the Earth to exist if we want to have a society, right? Maybe someday we'll get to Mars and that'll be great and, whatever. But that's decades down the road and like, whatever. Like, that is not my priority right now for my life. Yeah, my priority is making this place work.
Me too. I'm sorry, but when someone starts talking about colonizing Mars, I usually just change the channel. I mean, I get why it's interesting, but I just am more into making my backyard better. Go ahead. Sorry.
Totally. No, I mean, Mars is cool. Like, it's great to think sci-fi and think expanding. Like, it's cool. Like, I get it. I totally get why people think it's exciting.
I do
but
too.
Yeah, I'm just more invested in this moment right here on this planet because this is what we got. So,
right. So what is the best messaging for President Biden, Democrats, environmentalists, me?
Yeah, I mean, it's some people, it's like Uncle Sam style. Like, we want you, like, I need you. That's the kind of stuff is like, we're not trying to, like, it's not just pitting, the idea is like, not just that we shouldn't pit jobs versus the environment. It's also like, we shouldn't pit Americans against Americans or people against people. At the end of the day, like, we all should be working towards the same thing. And we may have different ideas of how to get there. And I have faith that like there will be policy disputes about how we actually achieve 100% renewable energy, about how we employ coal communities and bring them along in this transition. But at the end of the day, like, we need to say this is, we all need to be pulling towards this thing and we can all be part of this. And it's really about, not just saying like, we're going to sell this to you. It's really about opening a dialogue with these communities about how do we bring you into this discussion? How do we do this in a way that makes sure that you are part of it and you reap as many benefits as the folks in New York, as the folks in Iowa, as the folks anywhere?
Right. It's got to be good for everybody everywhere. And that's hard to do. A lot of competing interests. But you write about everything from decarbonizing buildings to electrifying transportation, renewable energy, changing over the federal fleet of cars. I want to talk about all of that. But what has been done? What can get done?
I mean, I say like the most exciting thing actually that I think has the potential to be the biggest game change for all this is that Biden has said he wants to electrify the entire federal electric vehicle or entire vehicle fleet. So the federal government owns almost 650,000 vehicles, like postal service trucks, cars that, drive around national parks for park rangers, tanks in the military, and electrifying tanks is maybe, we can have a conversation about that and whether we should.
Yeah, let's have a conversation about whether or not tanks are needed at all. Right. I mean, if we don't build a tank for a couple of years, I really don't think that would matter outside of the jobs that are tank builders. But the federal fleet is like 650,000 automobiles or something about that. What about that? Go ahead.
Yeah. So, electrifying those vehicles, whether, the ones especially that are passenger vehicles is what's really exciting to me because, when you're talking about that many cars, we're talking about a huge purchasing power of the federal government. And so, if they're saying, hey, we're going to put an order for, 100,000 American-made electric vehicles, or 200,000 postal service trucks that are electric, again, made in America. I mean, that has the potential to really move the market on this stuff. So, we're talking about like the car side of that. So we get the vehicles electrified. And then obviously there's the charging infrastructure side. And again, like if we are, all of a sudden you have these new government EVs on the road, where's the infrastructure going to be to charge them? Like that's going to need to be built out. And so again, like you're pushing, federal infrastructure to be built to do this on like, the FBI's properties, right? But you're also saying like, hey, like if the agents are out or the park rangers are buying the milk or whatever, like they got to have charging infrastructure in town. So you're also going to electrify things and you're going to get private companies on board as well. So it has the real potential to actually kickstart a much bigger electric vehicle revolution.
So that's the electrical, that's just part of just the beginning of the conversation about EVs in the federal government. That is the most exciting, I think. But what about the Climate Conservation Corps? You have a post at Earther about that, which I think is well, it's really nuanced. And we have to talk about the difference between a initiative like AmeriCorps versus what the Climate Conservation Corps, which so many of these ideas, by the way, in reading your recent post, have come out of Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, his presidential campaign, the activists that he worked with. It really has seen the Biden administration has adapted and adopted the ideas of so many other people. It's been very gratifying to see this cooperation and lending and loaning and adapting of ideas. But what about the Climate Conservation Corps? It seems really exciting. I want to get my daughters into it.
Yeah, do it. I mean, they should be coming of age, right? As it potentially comes of age. Well,
my younger daughter does. I will say she loves methane. I don't know what it is, but she's so pro. Can you imagine? All right. Sorry. Go ahead. The Climate Conservation Corps.
Wow. Your younger daughter's going to be like fracking. She's going to be the last fracker standing or something.
LFS. Go ahead, bud.
So the Climate Conservation Corps basically takes that AmeriCorps template, which is like community service volunteering. I mean, you get paid, and I did AmeriCorps when I was in my early 20s. I was in Gallup, New Mexico, doing community work there. And, it's one of those things you work for 5% above the poverty wages of the area. It does not pay well. You do get, money to go to college afterwards and a couple other things that are great. So basically the idea is that instead of just having folks going and volunteering in communities on projects that are, where I was, it was like doing free tax filing for folks in the Navajo Nation. Really needed stuff. But instead of doing that, people are going into the Climate Conservation Corps to do climate conservation work, whether it's restoring wetlands so that they can protect against storm surge, restoring forests so that they are resilient to wildfires, or storing carbon, things like that. I mean, it's possible that we'll see it be built out so that they're also installing solar panels or doing other kinds of community level resilience work.
Is this just an idea, or is it something that is going to happen that can be done through executive order or through the administration itself? Does this the kind of creation of a Climate Conservation Corps require Congress? Where are we on it?
Yeah, it does. So it's been announced in executive order, and basically now the big thing hanging over is how much is Congress going to fund it? So with Democrats controlling Congress, it seems likely that they could plow some money into this and say, yeah, this is the fund for this, and we're going to go forth and do it. So I think the executive order is the first step to making it reality. And then it does require funding, since, obviously these folks are going to need to be paid something, whether it's slightly above poverty level wages or something a little more enticing. But yeah, it's something that appears to be on the horizon, and it's super popular. I mean, for the flaws of AmeriCorps, which, I can speak to, but we'll just say that it's a complicated program. But for all that stuff, like that's a popular program. And the Climate Conservation Corps was one of the most popular climate programs proposed by any candidate during the Democratic primaries. So I think that you're going to see this groundswell of support for it as well.
That's awesome. And I really urge people to look this up and learn about it and get behind it and get excited by it. It's an exciting initiative. I really enjoyed reading and always enjoy reading your posts, but they get me excited. You're writing. And I think that's maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe I wasn't always excited by your or any, climate journalist writing during the Trump administration, because there was so much, we got to, this is happening and you have to cover what is happening. And now there is just so much potential for change. We're so far behind, but I guess what I'm trying to say is there's more than a glimmer of hope now, and you're covering it all, including, let's talk about the kind of the future of the oil industry, which you've been writing about. It's so important. It's so interesting, their PR campaigns, but more importantly, what the pandemic has laid bare and how the pandemic is hurting their profits. I think I heard yesterday that Exxon was losing $65 million a day. What is happening in the oil industry, and what are they trying to do to adapt to it? You have a piece titled Big Oil's Lies Are Finally Getting the Public Scrutiny They Deserve on Media. And then you also have this post about how apparently at one point, Exxon and Chevron were reportedly considering becoming an oil-stained Voltron. And you go on in that piece to make the most important point, which is, what would you call this company? And you suggested, do you remember what you suggested in this piece?
What was it? It was like Chevex, or
it was Chexon or Exron. And you made the argument it feels wrong to merge on naming grounds alone. Least important point, but yet this article is a super, and the future of the oil industry is what I want to talk with you about. What's happening?
I mean, they're just in free fall right now. These like all the major companies posted losses last year. All of the smaller companies are, in some state of disarray, whether it's being unable to pay loans, going bankrupt, idling exploration, or getting snapped up by these bigger companies. I mean, you're essentially seeing like the fact that it's cheap for the big companies right now to buy these smaller ones. And that consolidation sort of indicates the industry is not healthy if little companies can't get by. So, that's definitely one side of it. The other side is that, these big companies, even though they're buying some of the smaller ones, are still losing money. They're struggling. And this fact that Exxon and Chevron were thinking about merging, again, indicates that like, that's not a good place to be. If you're a multi-billion-dollar company and you need to join with your competitor, or you're considering joining with your competitor, that's just a sign that the industry is just not in a healthy place. And it, plays out in the fact that like workers are losing their jobs. It's not just, these companies are losing money, they're also shedding jobs. And that really, frankly sucks, because people being unemployed is not ever a good sign for anything, especially the economy and especially people's own well-being.
Yeah. There's a lot of communities. I think it's good for people to look at the communities where huge amounts of jobs are created or people are employed in these industries, oil and gas. If you're an environmentalist and you care about this, I think it's important to look at those communities and have some empathy for them and think about what they might do. I think about that all the time as just, a father trying to raise my kids. So, I mean, I know I mentioned this earlier, but knowing where those communities are and being cognizant of it is important. You have a piece, one of your most recent pieces at Earther, the Empire State Building runs on wind. It's so interesting. I mean, I think, maybe other people don't think, I like all of the things you write about. We're, climate nerds. I think that's one of the taglines for Earther, nature nerds. And I think the decarbonization of buildings is sexy. I'm aroused by it.
Wow. Oh, hey,
yeah.
Teach their own.
Yeah. And the Empire State Building, you write, is now running on wind. This is really got me excited. Turn me on, Brian. What's happening?
Yeah, we got to turn off the video chat here. Hands up.
I'll keep my hands up on the screen so you know that I'm not manipulating myself over this. But I think this is exciting. I think it's important. I mean, it's obviously.
Oh, it's super exciting. I mean, it doesn't arousal is maybe a step too far for me, but I do get excited, stimulated mentally at least, thinking about what's going on with these buildings and the wind power behind them. Just woo, wow.
I don't care. I don't feel judged by you. Go ahead. Excite me.
Judge, man. I don't kink shame.
Thank you.
But I will say, it is really exciting just because, the Empire State Building and the company that owns it owns a bunch of other buildings throughout Midtown and even up in, further outside the city and in Connecticut. And they're all running on wind now. And that makes them the biggest commercial purchaser of wind power in the US, I believe, which is super exciting. That's no small feat to buy that much wind power. And what that means is it's not like there are wind turbines on the Empire State Building or there's a direct plug that just shoots wind power right to it. But it means that they've made this power purchasing agreement where they're agreeing to buy the equivalent of their energy in renewables. And that goes onto the grid. It inspires companies to spend more money on renewables, install more. And that means, we get even more clean energy pumped onto the grid. So that to me is really exciting, along with the fact that even before all this, the Empire State Building.
But let me ask you, the transition to zero emission buildings, you write in this piece or reference an expert, requires a combination of market forces and government policy mandates. You talk about the fact that new construction, new buildings, can be retrofitted with all kind of energy saving construction materials, appliances, etc. But I feel like you made the point, and I'm not sure what the stats are, that the real work comes in retrofitting existing or older current buildings and making them more net zero. So let's talk about how that can be done with a combination of private and public mandates.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, I think a lot of it comes down to just incentivizing landlords to make those investments. I mean, if you're a homeowner, you want to spend less money on energy, right? Like your electric bill, you don't want it to be super high. Your heating bill, same deal. And so there's a little bit of an incentive there as a homeowner just to like go and start doing this. But governments can certainly make a better nudge, whether it's offering rebates on solar water heaters, paying so that when you put solar panels in your house, the money, when the energy goes into the grid, you get paid a fee back. Those things kind of exist. They just need to be built out more. When it's owners versus, I'm a renter myself, like my landlord might have a little bit less incentive to do this because I pay, my own electric bill. But at the end of the day, I mean, if we can incentivize them to do retrofits, whether it's putting in new energy efficient windows, things like that can help. Another thing that governments are doing, less so at the state level, but grow in increasing numbers at state levels, is banning new gas hookups. And so that's super exciting to me because it means you have less, gas coming into your home, which is also good for your indoor air quality. But at the end of the day, like if we can also make sure that those gas bans don't just affect new construction, but also start applying to old places that already exist and have gas stoves, we can retrofit places again with electric stoves, convection or induction stoves, things like that. Then you start to get into like way bigger dividends on decarbonization. So that's where, it just comes into the fact that we just need policy incentives to line up things for building owners to do these things and do them for tenants so they can also in the end save money as well.
I hate that you had to write about this, and I hate that I have to ask you about it, but the title of this post is QAnon Congresswoman also believes a space laser sparked California's deadliest wildfire. And until I read that piece, because I didn't want to know what she was talking about really, but I'm glad I did because it explained it all, and more importantly, explained the aftermath of those horrible wildfires in terms of the consequences and responsibility for them and what has been done and what, frankly, unfortunately, hasn't been done about them. But Marjorie Taylor Greene said that a space laser sparked California's deadliest. She said that? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, and that's like, this was a theory at the time. And it's a theory that's popped up every now and then. She just took it to like, she's in a position of power now. So inherently it sort of takes on next level sort of status. But, the idea, reading her post, it's absolutely one of the most unhinged things I've ever seen.
You wrote, the whole thing honestly makes my brain hurt. And that sentence is so well placed because my brain was starting to hurt reading it. I was like, I'm so glad you recognized my emotions while I'm reading your own piece.
Yeah, it's truly, the idea was that, there was the basic conspiracy theory, which has no basis in fact, was that there was a space laser that California utility was invested in that they used to blast. It was funded by the Rothschilds, a famous, Jewish family that, anti-Semites love to blame for everything. And they used it to start the forest fires to build a high-speed rail, which is like truly just like so many layers of crazy that it's really hard to figure out how you sort of peel back that onion.
Well, let me just read this last paragraph because I have it in front of me that you wrote. You wrote, needless to say, in the over 2 years since the Camp Fire was fully contained, no ground has been broken or contract sold on any sort of high-speed rail project in the devastated region. In reality, the towns devastated by the fire have struggled to recover, and you have a link to that. And more fires have burned in the region, indicating we need substantial intervention to stave off repeat of the Camp Fire. You got to get the door?
No, it's all good. We'll trash bags hang out.
No, that's funny. Marjorie Taylor Greene, you write, does not live in this shared reality to the detriment of public discourse and my personal emotional equilibrium. Sorry.
Truly, how do you, and that's what's crazy about this is like, how do you discuss or how do you have a rational discussion of governance with someone like that in the House? There's all these calls, by Republicans for like, when Joe Biden said unity, they're like, well, you got unity and like talk to us. And like, that's what bipartisanship is. But, there's no bipartisan solution to have a discussion around this. If this is what this person believes, like there's only one real truth here, which is that the fires were ignited by electric lines. It was hot and dry, spread by climate change induced conditions. And we need to talk about how we address that. Like, there's no need to investigate, if the space laser did this, like we know that. And so how do you negotiate with someone like that? I don't see a path forward to a rational discussion.
Are you excited about, or why does it matter that the climate, which one is it, John Kerry or is it Gina McCarthy? I think it's John Kerry's position that was created, is like a cabinet level position. I heard somebody or read something about why that's really important, but basically my understanding is having John Kerry there, and it's a cabinet level position, means that they're involved in national security conversations, which is such an important point. Also an important point, I think, sometimes to convince folks on the right that climate change is a national security issue. So that's, I think, probably my last question about the importance of that position, much less John Kerry being in it.
I think it's good overall that they are thinking about the climate as in such a holistic way, because to deny that national security question or connection would be silly. Like, it would leave a huge blind spot, right? But I will say that, like, it raises a few slight concerns in terms of how they respond to it as a national security question. Like, obviously, U.S. bases are affected by climate change. Obviously, climate change is destabilizing regions by, say, creating more drought and, forcing people into closer contact and raising the risk of conflict. So we should totally be talking about this stuff. I think where it gets a little bit concerning, or where I sort of, I guess, withhold a little bit of judgment, is how they deal with that. Is the response then to say, well, if we know it's a risk, we are going to increase aid to these places. We're going to make sure that conflict doesn't break out. Or is it to say that we will use the military to now respond to these things in a more reactive manner? And so when you think about climate as a national security issue, to me, the question is, are you using it then to be proactive and stave off the risk, or are you going to be reactive and respond with potentially force?
All important. Read everything that Brian is writing on a regular basis, and it's great reporting because you're always talking to other experts and posting about the most important issues. Always love your writing. Love talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know you've got a lot to do, including grabbing those trash bags that are outside your door. It's really, I keep thinking
most important thing I do, get the trash bags. But thanks for having me, Pete. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you. There he goes, Brian Kahn, Earther. Subscribe to their newsletter and follow Brian on Twitter. Tell him you heard him here on the show, at BL Kahn. If you haven't subscribed, by the way, as a paid subscriber, what the hell are you waiting for God's sake? You've been thinking about it. You've been wondering about it, but you're going to do it right now. You're going to subscribe. You're going to go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic, or you just go to the paid subscription link in the show notes, wherever you're listening to this podcast. And then you just go ahead and you sign up. You sign right the hell up and you become part of our community. You join us on Thursday nights and anytime on the Discord platform, where you're never alone, as I always promise. So sign up now. I didn't plug it at the top, so I wanted to plug it in between guests. And speaking of which, one of your all-time favorites joining me now. He is the Legal Eagle constitutional law professor. Eric Segall joined me for our almost weekly conversation. And he's always keeping me aware and abreast of what the hell is happening at the Supreme Court. And if it comes to issues regarding religion and race especially, Segall is always going to be writing about them and talking about them. I didn't even hear about this Friday ruling, but the California legislature had decided what was best based on science. The Supreme Court was not having any of it and decided they thought people should be going to church, and with certain regulations they should be hanging out in the churches because of their freedom to worship. Well, Segall was fired up about this ruling that barely anybody heard about, and that's what we talked about. Got a little preview of impeachment as well. He's on Twitter at @eSpinSegall. You can listen to and subscribe to his podcast, which is now, I think, 25 episodes. He talked to Adam Winkler of UCLA this week. Always great. On Twitter at @eSpinSegall, Georgia State law professor, author of Supreme Myths and Originalism as Faith. Your favorite legal scholar, it's Eric Segall. And for the 10th time since October, we're laughing because he just said that. The Supreme Court issued a late night decision. Is that right?
Friday night, I think it was 11 p.m. There's a joke among people who know about inner Supreme Court stuff. There's a woman at SCOTUS blog. SCOTUS blog is the most reliable place you can go. In fact, Pete, you won't believe this when I say this, I think, but if you want to find out and read the briefs of cases in the Supreme Court, and these days, of course, any big case has, 50 amicus, 50 briefs, friend of the court briefs, but this SCOTUS blog is not part of the Supreme Court. It's not run by the Supreme Court. It's not a government agency. It has like all the documents. Like you can't, it's a much better website than the Supreme Court anyway. And there's a woman there whose job it is to write about new breaking Supreme Court cases. And so she has to write these things like at 2:00 in the morning.
Why did they come out late at night? Why is that important?
I don't know the end. Well, it's important because we'll talk about the case in a second, but a lot of these orders have been about the pandemic or before that about voting, issues and before the election. And they're really important freaking cases. And the thing is, they come out, Pete, without oral argument, and they come out without full briefing. It's called the shadow docket. A guy named Will Bode came up with that name. He's a really, really smart guy, except when he talks about originalism, then he's not. But he's he's a friend. He's a really smart guy. And this shadow docket thing, Steve Vladeck is also on this train, and he's on your show, I think. It's a terrible thing they do. They issue these opinions without briefing, without argument, and sometimes without reasoning. And it's not acting like a court because we expect courts not to do that.
Well, yeah, we can get into the issue, but late Friday night, the court released a ruling that
Don't even say it yet. Hold on, don't even say it. Okay. Let's start at the beginning. Okay, let's do it this way. Pete, did you know that we are in a worldwide pandemic?
Yes.
Did you know that over 1 million people in California have been infected with the disease?
Wow, I didn't know it was that many, but they do have like almost 40 million people there. Except some people have you believe they all moved to Texas.
Did you know, I did not know this following fact, that California's economy is bigger than every country in the world except 5. So
that sounds about right, yeah.
California, in effect, is the 6th biggest country in the world economically.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because you wrote about that in your piece and how hard that must be to manage.
And imagine you're the governor of California, and it's not just L.A. and Hollywood, but it's Orange County and San Diego, and that's more conservative and a different kind of place. And it's Sacramento in the northeast part of the state, the capital. And then there's San Francisco and all the rural counties up there. Many rural counties in California are much more conservative than people think. And then you have, of course, L.A., San Francisco, San Diego. It is like running a country. So the governor of California, along with various agencies and political officials and scientists, have had to figure out what to do about the worldwide pandemic. And I will not bore your listeners to this podcast with the incredible number of regulations and different places. Depending on the infection rate, they have different rules for different places. But one thing they said relatively recently was no indoor religious gatherings, no indoor gatherings at museums, no indoor gatherings at theaters, basically no indoor gatherings at places where a lot of people congregate for long periods of time.
Right.
Does that sound like a reasonable thing to you?
Yeah, you don't have to be an epidemiologist when you think about that. And when it's spelled out how then people behave in those places. For example, if you have a restaurant, it's one thing. If you space people out and put plastic between, then there's all kinds of things.
But no restaurants either, but no indoor dining either.
Right,
so, I mean,
it's still different than religious services if they're not, practicing certain mandated regulations. But go ahead.
Well, so my only point in all of that is trying to figure out what to do with an economy bigger than every country in the world except 5, with 1 million people infected, and with a state that it's not like, I mean, of course, New York has New York City and Western New York and upstate New York. Georgia has Atlanta, and so, but California is like all that times 10.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of diversity and geography and everything else. So they're doing the best they fucking can. Okay.
Wow.
And then on Friday night at 11 p.m., all 6 conservative justices agreed to strike down the ban on indoor religious gatherings without touching, by the way, the bans on theaters, museums, and other places. California had also banned singing and chanting in indoor places, and they did uphold that for now with just Alito and Thomas, and I think it was Gorsuch disagreeing with that part of it. But all 6 conservatives second-guessed, overturned, and reversed this California rule about no indoor religious services. Today on my Supreme Minutes podcast, I had law professor Adam Winkler on. He's been on your show several times. Yeah. He's a gun expert. He's a corporate law expert, and he's really sensible. And he lives in L.A. So I was asking him about all this, and he was even telling me, and you'll be interested in this, Pete, where he lived. He's well-to-do, and where he lives near UCLA in kind of that area of Los Angeles. COVID isn't that terrible. Because people have white-collar jobs. They don't leave their office. He says he hasn't left his office, in a year. And it's not great, but people aren't dying left and right. But you go 10 miles away, and hospitals are in crisis. And it is just terrible. And again, 1 million people infected in the state. So they're doing the best they can. So these 6 conservative justices say, I can barely say it out loud. They say that the government is not treating religion well enough because of the First Amendment to the Constitution, which says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That applies to the states as well. And apparently, so the law used to be, since 1990, since Justice Scalia wrote a landmark opinion, the law has been when a state or federal government passes a law that was not passed to hurt religion, wasn't passed to discriminate against religion, wasn't passed to make religion worse in any way, but for other reasons, and then religious practices get swept up into it, Scalia held that you have no religious claim because we can't function as a society, Pete, if everybody gets to decide which laws they abide and which laws they don't, based on their own personal religious conscience. No secular society could work that way. If you're a country of all Muslims, you can do that. If you're a country of all Jews, you can maybe do that. Can't do it here. And neither the founding fathers nor anyone since thinks you can. Well, these justices are undermining that decision. And so one of the bad things that happened with this is there really wasn't even an opinion for the court. Justice Gorsuch wrote just for himself and 2 other of the conservatives.
Alito and Thomas.
And what he did, Pete, was he took all of the reasons for the law and separated them and said, well, it's one of the reasons is you don't want a lot of people in the same place. But California is letting that happen at shopping malls and Target. But California's answer to that was people don't go to Target and sit around for 3 hours.
Right.
Among many other things. People in Target don't go and talk, and you don't have, in a lot of religious gatherings, there's talking and there's, up and down talking. We don't have that in Target. Anyway, there are all these reasons California gave. And Justice Kagan said in dissent that California acted on the basis of scientific epidemiological, is that a word?
You nailed it.
Epidemiologist advice. It's all in the record. It was all in California's brief. And the justices don't deal with it at all. So this is basically an edict, Pete. Now, so Gorsuch is clever, and he dismantles all the reasons and analyzes them independently without realizing, this is what Adam said today, without realizing that it's not 4 separate reasons. We're trying to slow the spread. And we're doing that by stopping people from hanging out with each other for long periods of time inside.
Right.
That's why you can't go to a movie in fucking L.A. Right? That's why you can't go to a museum, because even museums, people sit around a painting and look at it for, no, you can't do that. And no, you can't sit in a church for 3 hours. Anyway, so that was bad enough. Kagan writes an incredibly persuasive dissent. It's like 4 pages, but it's just, it knocks down everything the court says. And then there's the freaking Chief Justice.
Roberts.
He writes basically a paragraph and a half or 2. And in this, remember, this is overturning a law of the state of California during a worldwide pandemic. How carefully should the court approach that task, do you think?
Yeah, that's really the crux of all of this, is anytime they're overturning a law passed by the legislative branch, it should be delicate. But in this case, you would think there would even be that much more care and attention be paid to it. Yeah.
And so Roberts says, son of a bitch, you can quote me, says, I do believe in deference, and I do believe we should give public officials a lot of latitude to make their decisions. But deference only goes so far. But he doesn't explain why he's voting the way he's voting. So that's one of the things that bothers me. Then explain your freaking vote if you're not going to exercise that deference during if I mention there's a worldwide pandemic, but then it gets worse. Kagan in her dissent basically said, she said, we unelected life tenure judges sitting in this marble palace, if people die because of what we just did, there's no political stain on us because we have our jobs for life. And thus we should really, be careful here. Roberts turns that around and says it is because we have life tenure that we have to make sure we enforce people's liberties.
No,
freaking no. It's because you have life tenure that you should be modest and humble. And during a worldwide emergency, be very careful about what you do to a state that is, in fact, the sixth biggest country in the world.
Yeah. I mean, this reminds me a lot. Understandably so, and I'm glad you brought it to our attention. It's an important decision buried on a Friday night, and it's another decision where the legislative branch is overruling the judicial overruling the legislative branch in it. But it's also, this is the kind that really is infuriating because they're second guessing science and medicine. It reminds me of court decisions around abortion. And the court deciding things that every single specialist, OBGYN, disagrees with. I can't think of too many other examples around that don't stem from someone's religious belief, where a court would overrule scientists and doctors based on anything other than some religious belief. And maybe I'm missing many, but.
Well, so there's a lot of stuff going on here. So let's just go back a few years, all right? The Roberts Court is going to be known, I think, in two major ways. One, as the destroyer of voting rights, which you and I have talked about, ad nauseum. The destroyer of voting rights. And their second legacy will be a court that believed in religious supremacy, not religious liberty. So, for example, the Roberts Court is the first court in history to hold, I can't even say the sentence, that $1 billion for-profit company has rights under a statute protecting the free exercise of religion. Just stop right there. Hobby Lobby is $1 billion corporation that does business, with China and all these other countries. And there's a statute that was passed to protect religious minorities. And then they give Hobby Lobby the benefit of this law. And the idea, how can any sensible, now I'm not talking about a butcher who has 3 employees, who's on the corner, who runs a for-profit, Jewish butcher runs a for-profit store, but he has 3 employees. That's a family-owned business. Now it is true Hobby Lobby is a family-owned, it's $1 billion for-profit company. The butcher can exercise religion. And the CEO of Hobby Lobby can exercise religion. But the shell or the fiction that we call Hobby Lobby, they can't whatever you, I don't know what pronoun, we're in a lot of pronouns these days. I have no idea what pronoun to use for a corporation. But you know what pronoun is, but you know what pronoun is not available? Believer or worshiper or going to church-er, because corporations don't do those things.
Right.
So started with Hobby Lobby. That was really, really bad. And then last June, religion. And then last June, even worse. Pete, like 35 or 6 states prior to last June had provisions that said taxpayer money can't go to religious organizations. Because you don't have to be a historian to understand that one of the things that Jefferson and Madison was so, keen on was my tax dollars shouldn't go to support your religion. And your tax dollars shouldn't go to support my religion.
Right.
And atheists and agnostics' tax dollars shouldn't go to support anybody's religion, and so on and so forth. And so, in recent years, and you know more about this than I do, I think, all these private, kind of magnet schools that are quasi-public, quasi-private have been opening up, in addition to other private schools. And states, and this is fair, they want all kids in all schools to get a better education. So they give tuition breaks and allocate money and resources to these private schools. And they've never, ever, ever in the history of the United States had to give the same assistance to religious private schools that it gives to non-religious private schools ever in the history of the United States. When I was at the Department, I'm sorry, I'm ranting. When I was at the Department of Justice, I represented the United States Department of Education giving money to religious schools. Mm-hmm. But the issue there was not, did the government have to give the money? It was, could it give the money? And the answer was no for a long time. And then the court changed its mind on that. And by the way, I'm with the court on that. If the state wants to give non-religious money to private religious schools, fine, it's their business. If they want to do that. Montana didn't want to do that. And last June, the Supreme Court held for the first time in American history that if states want to provide assistance to private secular schools, it also has to provide assistance to private religious schools. And Montana didn't want to do that. And by the way, there are only Christian schools in private schools in Montana. There are no Jewish schools. There are no Muslim. The whole thing is a nightmare and a disaster. And this, so what you and I have been talking about since 2008, when I first came on your show, is that the court reflects the values of the justices on the court, not the law. So just going to give a couple examples. From 1900 to 1936, we had justices who grew up in the 1870s, and they thought free market, free market, free market. The government cannot regulate business. So minimum wage laws, overtime laws, union laws, worker protection laws, 200 of those laws were struck down between 1900 and 1936 because the justices hated regulation. Then the New Deal came, FDR threatened to pack the court. Everything changes. Then we get the Warren Court in the 60s that is very progressive and very liberal and does a lot of progressive liberal things. Then we get the Burger Court, which is kind of in between. What we have now, make no mistake about this, what we have now are 6
Ayatollah Court.
Religious. We have 6 dogmatic religious people on the court. So their decisions don't reflect law, don't reflect cases. The court is about to overturn Justice Scalia's best case he ever wrote. It is a court that wants to make religion supreme. And it is in a country that is becoming more and more less and less religious. I hope there's going to be a push come to shove moment, because this is getting absurd. But leaving aside all the stuff about schools and all the stuff about Hobby Lobby, California is trying to deal with a health emergency, and the court is making it much harder for it to do so, and that's wrong.
Well, it's always most infuriating when the courts say that a business can or a school can protect religious interests when those interests are dangerous, literally dangerous. And mostly it's all in the past. It's been about women's bodies, women's reproductive health. But you could argue about any kind of birth control. You could argue about STDs, I think, AIDS and so on. But this is a virus, a different kind of virus that affects everybody. And as you're saying, California has made decisions, although they haven't had a perfect record. They've been all over the place. It's a very messy situation. Nonetheless, it has nothing to do with religion.
Right. Well, that's a great point.
It also doesn't have to do with like the restaurant lobby per se. There's a lot of competing interests that are based on money and financial concerns, which is but to me, it's a lot more of a reasonable concern
So let's talk about that. Because
I mean, why can't the church thing? I'm trying not to be. You said the last time we talked, I need to be more humble and understand the interests and passions of religious folks.
Be more humble.
Something he did. Find some humility. Something really sharp. Hit me right in the ribs. But it was right. Number one, and you did. I'll play it back. And number two, go to church on Zoom. I know that means you might not be able to taste the body of Christ, but I could just tell you what it tastes like. Cardboard. I mean, you can have your church services. You can worship. In any number of ways.
It's California.
Go outside. Great point. Right. Yeah. Did you not put that in your piece? I don't think. You can go outside in California.
Right.
And most parts.
by the way, this piece is going to be on the American Constitution Society blog by the time this is.
Yeah, I'll link to it in the show notes. Yeah, so go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So you made a great point, though. So one of the things that I agree with the Supreme Court about, that everybody agrees with, is that when government decision makers try to hurt religion intentionally, then we have to be careful, right? We don't want to be in a world which we were in for a long time, where the dominant religion, keeps passing laws to hurt minority religions. And so there's a case out of Florida, small town in Florida, where they banned certain kinds of animal sacrifices, but they created all kinds of exceptions. And it was all about, and everyone knew it, driving away a minority religious sect out of the town. And the Supreme Court unanimously and correctly struck that down, because freedom of religion is a right. And when the government targets you intentionally because of that right, then I think judges have a role to play. Now, I would play a lesser role probably than other people, but there is a role to play. The governor of California is not hating on religion here. And politically, by the way, it would be crazy for him to do so, even in California. That's not what he's doing. You said before overturning legislative branch, this is actually more the governor acting with, but this is up your alley, Pete, a bunch of experts who are guiding him along the way. So one of the things Kagan said is, we're not scientists.
Right.
And they're not scientists.
Where does it come from? Where does their religious, I mean, you believe and have a lot of evidence that it is, they really believe this crazy shit. It's not political. The conservative justices, Alito, for sure.
Yeah. No, I think they're religious. I think they are.
What's her name? Amy Coney Barrett, for sure. I mean, they're dyed in the wool, God-fearing, believing.
Yes. But that's fine. I don't hold that against them. But
I don't hold it against them either if they aren't basing their decisions on their religion. But it can't be said enough. Christianity, you always make this point about how many Christians are going to generally be in the room, and how the Jewish, the Muslim, or non-religious person feels in that room based on a decision being made. They're all Christian. The religious ones.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. It's another case that they did. Roberts Court did just such a horrific case involving near you, Grist, New York. Isn't that close to where you live?
No, where I grew up in Western New York.
Oh, where you grew up? That's what I meant. Yeah. In Grist, New York, where basically a legislature had only Christian prayers for like 2 years. Now I'm okay constitutionally with a legislature or town hall starting with a moment of silence. I'm even okay with the state legislature. This is hard to justify, but I'm even okay saying, let's just close our eyes and pray to God for a minute or something. You don't have to pray, but I mean, take a moment to, but that's not what they did. They had Christian prayers only.
No, in that case, they made everybody clap 3 times and say Jesus is love, which
almost, Pete. They almost did that.
Jesus is your friend.
Or we can talk about the huge cross on government property.
Yeah, well,
that the court upheld. Yeah. Or we can talk about the time, and I'm not making this up, when Justice Scalia said that a cross in a cemetery is not a symbol of Christianity, but a universal symbol of something I didn't quite understand. And the entire room gasped. I don't identify as Jewish at all, but the idea that a Supreme Court justice would think that Jews or Muslims would recognize the cross, leaving aside agnostics and atheists, as a war symbol rather than a Christian symbol. And he said it. The whole world heard it. I mean, it's imagine if he said the Star of David was a universal symbol that all religions, accept. And I mean, it's just unbelievable. So I am so tired of this court kowtowing and preferring religion over secular values under the law.
Thank God we have you ringing the bell. Thank God. Every time, though, because, I mean, I hadn't heard anything about this, and I scan the news for a living.
Right.
And there are a lot of people that pay attention and cover these things, but very few cover the court's decisions on this.
And thank you for having me on, because I want to do this before impeachment starts, because then everything is going to be all.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
One last note.
Sure.
One last note.
Sure. You want to say a prayer?
If an unelected, life-tenured if an institution composed of life-tenured, unelected lawyers is going to mess with the governor of California's attempt to deal with a pandemic that has affected 1 million people in California, and I think killed almost 40,000. If they're going to do it in the fucking light of day, not at 11 o'clock on Friday night. I mean, that's just not how democracy should work, Pete.
Do the people of California even realize that this decision came down and affects them? I mean, if they don't go to church?
I think one of the reasons, I have no idea, I'm guessing here, when we cleared it, late Friday night, they knew Sunday was coming, right? I mean, that's why it wasn't Monday night or Tuesday night. By the way, they'd had the briefs for a week. So it wasn't like, sometimes the court has no choice, right? Like in death penalty cases, the guy's going to die at midnight. Right. They have to do something before that, either yes or no. This was not that kind of case. It had been there for a week at least. So everything about this Friday night, 11 o'clock horrific order just substantiates this court is not a court and its justices are not judges. I'm done. Okay.
All right, so let's talk about the impeachment. Preview. You say the preview on impeachment this week is brief? Not much to know?
So I was chagrined, devastated. So I'm one of the few. Sorry, let me start at the beginning. I'm kind of riled up today. I apologize. On my podcast, I've been asking all these people, many of whom are progressive, but not all, in the last month or so, would you have this trial? Like, would you do this? Forgetting whether it's constitutional for a moment, because it's obviously constitutional, but leaving that aside. And everybody's yes. You can't let this go. You've got to punish him. You've got to make a point. I don't agree, Pete. I'm sorry. I'm going to be a lone voice in the wilderness here. We know the Republicans aren't going to convict. They've already done it. 45 of them have already voted that it's an unconstitutional trial. So we know, because they claim you can't impeach a former officer, even though, here's a little detail for you, he was impeached while he was the president of the United States, among many other reasons why this is obviously constitutional. So Adam Winkler today was very thoughtful and pushed back at me and said, no, you have a point, Eric, but we really have to make a statement. We can't let this go unpunished.
Well, your point is one about politics, not law.
Yeah, strategy. Yeah, I'm opining about strategy.
Yeah, okay.
But which I admit is not my expertise. But I was chagrined to learn just 2 hours ago that apparently the schedule is out, just came out, and tomorrow they're going to spend 4 hours debating the constitutionality of the entire proceeding. Pete, why are they doing that? They've already voted on it. They already said it was constitutional. And 45 Republicans said it wasn't. The majority said it was. Why are they spending 4 hours tomorrow on this question? There's no good answer to that question, which goes to my next point. I mean, unless you can think of a good answer to that question. Do you have a good answer to that question?
No, I mean, I don't know how the process is.
They've already voted on this.
Made, and I don't know who gets to say how much time is spent on what.
The Democrats get to say finally they have a fucking majority. Well, they have 50, plus the vice president. Listen, they're going to screw it up. They screwed it up last time. They're going to screw it up this time. I can tell by the schedule what's going to happen. Now, I mean, if they had some videotape, and maybe they do, although I doubt it, of Trump, really directly, calling somebody and saying, go in and take no prisoners, or, literally, go in and do violence, go in and we know he knew that was going to happen. But without the evidence that he participated directly in it, then it's going to come off kind of weak. And what do we gain by this? Because we already know he's not going to be convicted. And guess what the American people are going to think when he's not convicted? You tried to prove it and you couldn't. They're not going to separate out the votes that said it was unconstitutional to do this from very few Republicans are going to defend him. Last time they defended him, I don't think that's happening this time. Right?
Listen, I mean, I just disagree with you based on, you may be right. I mean, but this is a political analysis and the idea in the end, what are the consequences? What is the reaction? How does it affect public opinion? How do people see it? Yes. I think that's the main and most important question that needs to be asked. And I realize what you're saying is that he will come away looking vindicated again, not guilty.
Yes.
And I think that you have to put in this case, Republican senator on the record for voting to let him off the hook. Again, I think accountability matters.
But that's not what's going to happen, Pete. That's not what's going to happen, though. See, that's the problem. my prediction is, again, let me concede, I'm not a pundit. This is not my expertise. But what I think is likely to happen is when they vote, they're going to make it clear that they're not voting because they think he's innocent. They're voting because they think the procedure is unconstitutional.
Well, yeah, but that will be lost. Yeah, but you're saying the details don't matter, and then you're making a point about the details.
Yes.
So
yes, no. My point. You said put him on the record. They won't go on the record.
They have to vote. They have to vote.
No, but they're going to vote and say he could have killed 10,000 people.
But that's
doesn't
the
matter.
Record. But nobody's going to care about what they say. It's going to be like, I don't remember what they said the first impeachment. I just know that all but I think Mitt Romney voted to let him go. And I think that matters because you look back and history looks back and said, wow. I mean, the point of that first impeachment.
I hope you're right.
The point of the first impeachment, and I don't know if this is right about, what the outcome is, but certainly the point of the first impeachment was we have to impeach him or else he's going to do tremendous damage to more damage to the country. And we can talk about, that case in Ukraine and so on.
Right.
But had he been impeached, arguably a lot more Americans wouldn't have died of COVID and there wouldn't have been an insurrection on the Capitol. And most importantly, isn't actually the 5 lives lost. It's not, in my opinion. You would not have had the big lie. You wouldn't have had it. He would have been impeached. And every one of those Republican senators but Mitt Romney is responsible for all of the loss of life that occurred during the time that he stayed in office.
There's a lot of there's a tremendous amount of truth packed into what you just said.
Every one of those Republican senators is guilty and has blood on their hands for not voting to impeach him.
And not one of them is going to suffer politically for it.
Yes, but that's not the consideration that you necessarily look at. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. I mean, you could argue even that the moderate or Mitt Romney does suffer politically. I don't think he will because of Utah.
After the impeachment, we lost seats in the House. And the only reason it
wasn't because of the impeachment. You would have, you had to do.
I'm just saying it didn't help. It didn't help.
It did. I think what you're missing in your political analysis is that Democrats, liberals, whatever, Trump people demand that there be a hearing, that there be accountability. And if Republicans who have the ability to let him off the hook, so be it. But if you don't put this guy on trial, we won't vote for you, Democrats. I remember how impassioned
the base
was about the first impeachment and impeaching him before the Ukraine call. And Nancy Pelosi didn't think she had the political approval, capital to do it until the phone call. But I mean, if Democrats don't do it, they suffer.
I don't know. I maybe, but I'm not sure. I admit, I don't know all the political calculations. It's complicated.
I mean, the insurrection is far worse than the phone call. And it's far easier for people to understand as opposed to things like quid pro quo and everything else.
Sure. Although I think the phone call to Georgia was really bad.
Yes, but again, it's a phone call. And why don't they bring them in?
But that one's on tape.
It's on tape.
Unlike Ukraine.
Right.
So
but
we have that one.
Why don't they bring them in as witnesses?
I don't know. I will say this. Jamie Raskin is I think he's the lead House manager.
Smart cat.
Jamie's a friend. I actually sat.
Yeah, you told me that. He's been on this podcast.
Yeah. I sat in his office for a semester when he had cancer. He took a leave of absence at American. He was a law professor at American. He got cancer. They needed somebody really fast, so I agreed to sub. I commuted back and forth from Atlanta to Washington.
Because he was a Kahn law professor.
Yeah. He had a great office. He had a lot of fun things in his office. But anyway, he's a good guy. He just lost his son tragically. Yeah. But he's a really, really good guy. He's smart. But let me tell you what he's not. So, and what I'm about to say is
that you're smarter than Jamie Raskin.
No, I'm not saying that at all. This is a total compliment, Pete, what I'm about to say. Not only does he have integrity, which very few politicians do.
No, a lot of them do. That's cynical.
I don't know.
That's cynicism.
I don't know. I sorry, that's how I feel. He's not a killer, and like McConnell's a killer, right? I mean, Schumer may or may not be a killer. I have no idea, but I mean, I'm speaking metaphorically, of course. Jamie is not that, and I don't know which way that cuts in this situation. In other words. He will do the right thing. Like he'll do the thing with integrity. It's who he is. I've known him a long time. And I don't know if that's who you want for this job. I mean, maybe you do, but I'm sorry, I'm going to do it. Posner alert, Posner alert. He used to yell at me all the time, calling me naive. You naive young man, he used to say to me. Because according to Posner and according to Machiavelli, politicians have to lie. They just do. All politicians everywhere in every country, they lie. They just do. And that's
to a certain extent, and that's part of
being a politician.
Yeah, but it's can unpack it. By the way, it's interesting because when I was talking to you and a couple of others about potentially running for Congress over a year ago now,
I told you you couldn't do it.
You said that you can't do it, you can't lie. And you know who else said that? My brother. Like two of the people closest to me that I respect the most, you and my brother both said that. And I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? And you both explained it to me. And I thought it was very interesting and thoughtful and flattering.
So I've always thought, I think that this is not fair to do to your audience, but my wife, Lynn, I think would actually be a very effective politician in the sense of that she's really smart and she handles herself really well in public. And I think she's really good at that kind of thing. And I actually, when I first met her, I actually encouraged her to think about it. But then I realized she's not a liar. So no, she can't do it. You have to be, because it's all compromise and it's all, what I learned, I told you this before, bro, it's been a while. So I spent 4 years at the Department of Justice in a really political job. I worked on closing the Palestinian mission to the United Nations. I worked on the Lockerbie plane crash that we still don't know really what happened in that plane crash. I worked on big free speech, religion cases. I was really in political cases. And what I learned from the political appointees I answered to, these are people the Senate had to confirm, is it's just appearances, Pete. I mean, it's just fucking appearances. And reality always takes a second seat. Now, I'm not sure that's true for Jamie because he's not a born politician, right? Jamie's career was a very successful law professor. And then he decided, to change. But it's very difficult to be an effective politician without being a scumbag.
Well, we will see what happens. I don't really agree with that necessarily.
Yes, you do.
No, I don't, because I know a lot of these people personally, and I understand how human behavior works, and I understand what you have to do to convince people and to sell ideas.
You think JFK was a scumbag? Yes or no? I'm putting you on the stand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Was JFK a scumbag?
He did things with young women that would be considered today horrific.
LBJ, even then, Pete, they were considered horrific. LBJ, who got the Voting Rights Act passed and the Civil Rights Act 1964 passed, which is two of the most important things ever happened in American history. Famous scumbag. He would talk to people pooping on the toilet. Seriously.
Well, that's not. If that makes you a scumbag, then
no. He was a guy who would do anything to get his way.
Yeah, but shitting on the toilet can't possibly be your example for his questioning his character.
I don't have to defend the idea that Lyndon Johnson was a scumbag. I don't.
I'm not saying you do. I'm just saying that the point that you use, the argument about the fact that he would take calls on the can, I mean, that makes all of us monsters.
No, but he was doing that to show people. He was doing that as a power play, you nut. Anyway.
How do you know? He what? Really? Like he told them I'm on the can right now?
So in the LBJ Museum, I'm not going to continue this argument. They're all scumbags. Almost all of them are scumbags.
All right, well.
Your audience will agree with me. But let me just say this. The LBJ Museum in Austin, Texas is one of the great museums I've ever been to. First of all, there's a lot of civil rights stuff because LBJ, a lot of Martin Luther King stuff, because they work together. So it's really fascinating for that reason. But there's this exhibit where you get actual phone calls between LBJ and other people.
Yeah, I've heard that, and he's on the toilet on a couple of those calls. I've heard those. Those are great.
All kinds of crazy things.
Yeah, I think I just found my end of show audio, by the way.
That's right. Okay, let me backtrack a little bit. I'm sure there are politicians out there who are good, decent people. But I think politics is the art of the possible. And you have to give, right? And when you give and take and compromise, sometimes you have to make deals with the devil.
But I think you
have to be comfortable with that.
You base a lot of your opinion, rightfully so, on the time that you spent around them years ago. And I do think that if you look at the midterm elections of 2018, for example, you look at all of those women who came in as Democrats, especially women of color, and anybody else who chose to go into politics, into government because of a horrible thing that happened to them or their community. For example, Lucy McBath, I think her name is, her son was gunned down. So it was gun issues. And AOC, I think, went in for all of the right reasons. I think several of them went into Congress, Cori Bush, for so many of the right reasons. And I believe that that's, maybe being there changes them. But
nothing you just said is inconsistent with what I said. I agree with you. Many, many people go into politics for the right reasons. I never said they didn't. Once you get there, though, if you don't lie, you're not going to be effective. That's all I'm saying. No. There are many, many people. I am sure the majority, I'd like to think the majority of people who run for office are doing it.
I don't think a lot of them are lying a lot. I don't think Bernie Sanders lies a lot. I don't think.
Oh, my God.
You do? You think Bernie Sanders is a scumbag who lies a lot?
Well, I'm pretty sure he's a scumbag. Whether he lies or not, I don't want to make a statement without going to the record, but I am guessing that we could find in his speeches many things that aren't true.
A lot of people are going to love this conversation because of the different opinions that we hold. Most people share your opinion, I think. But
I think so too.
In my experience being around these people and understanding what the task is and how things have changed, I just don't. I don't think James McGovern of Massachusetts 2nd District is a scumbag. I don't think Walter B. Jones was a scumbag. He was a conservative Christian congressman. I think there's a lot of people who are pretty good. I think Senator Chris Murphy in Connecticut.
I like Chris Murphy. Chris Murphy.
Sherrod Brown. I think Sheldon Whitehouse is fantastic. There's a lot of Democratic senators.
Sheldon Whitehouse, who is
wrote
probably
an amazing book. Amazing book.
He's probably the U.S. senator who agrees with me the most about the Supreme Court.
Yeah?
He's been on
I'm trying to get him on the show. I should email his people again.
Oh, I can help you with that.
Yeah?
Let's talk afterwards.
Yeah, I've had him on. I had him on the Sirius show for his book.
I helped write a brief for him once. So, for his office, he was on the emoluments stuff with Trump. It was about standing and emoluments. How interesting is that? Anyway,
wow, I'm aroused.
I know. But even Sheldon Whitehouse, Pete, because I follow him and I like him. I would vote for him if he was in my state. I've seen him do things that I would say, I'm sorry you had to do that because that wasn't the right thing.
I'd like to know if those examples, you don't have them off the top of your head, though.
Yeah. Well, for one thing, I do have them on top of my head. So, this is a silly example, but it's true. So a big part of Sheldon, I'm going too long. You can
Go ahead.
This shorter.
Well, people can also stop whenever they want to. It's a great thing.
Freedom of speech in America. Not freedom. So one of the things White House has been big on, of course, is how the court in every voting case ever always votes for the Republicans. Since Robertson and Alito came on the court in 2006, and he even filed a brief in the Supreme Court in the redistricting case, saying that you guys always vote for Republicans and you got to stop and blah blah blah. And it's the right point, and he's overall correct. His descriptive account is accurate, but his numbers were not accurate. And he made it, he didn't have to do this because the numbers are really bad, but he had to make them so dramatic that they're not quite as bad as he said they were. And that difference, Pete, is a big difference. It's because he knew. They knew. He has people working for him. So to make it, so that's the kind of thing that like, hopefully most academics don't do, I like to think. Adam and I were talking about that earlier today, Adam Winkler and I. We try to, we're all politically biased, we all have our priors, and all that, but we try to get it as right. I don't think politicians, they want to make the statement, whether it's accurate or not. Well,
if you're saying that Sheldon Whitehouse is a scumbag or that he's been not that he's a scumbag.
I'm not saying that.
I know. You're saying that he was unethical or had a lack of integrity by embellishing numbers he knew.
I'm saying that his overall description of the Supreme Court of the United States in voting cases is accurate, and he could have made every point he made without making. He said that at one point he said there were 72 cases and the court decided for Republicans 72 times. And then it became a little later 75 out of 75. That's not true. Those aren't the right numbers. They're not accurate. It's how you characterize things. It's how you talk about things. It's not. It sounds good to say that. What he could have said is that since Robertson and Alito took the court since 2006, the court struck down the Voting Rights Act. The court upheld, voter ID, and and in most other cases seems to be aligned with the Republican Party. All of that's true. 75 out of 75 is not true. And so why say that? Like, why do it?
I mean, if that's the example, we'll let folks decide if they think that is beneath the character integrity of a United States senator.
Well, now I'm nervous. I like Sheldon Whitehouse a lot. I like his staff. I've worked with him.
I think he would have no problem with that quibbling and criticism. I just don't think it's representative of the kind of issue that you're pointing to.
I think this is. I want next time you are gracious enough to have me on, I want to have this conversation. We can end it and then begin where we end, unless something else happens in the world.
Yeah, it's a conversation about cynicism.
No, I don't think so.
How cynical are you about Congress, policymakers, politicians?
Okay, so let me tell you how Posner would put that. He wouldn't put it cynically. What he would say is, when a small number of people have to make difficult decisions affecting large numbers of people, there's a process in free countries. We're not talking about dictators here. We're talking about in democracies or reasonably free countries. There's a process that by definition you have to winnow out the relevant information so the public can understand what's going on. And in that winnowing out, there will be compromises made with the truth that you and I wouldn't make in our private lives, and you wouldn't have made, by the way, back at Sirius XM, and you wouldn't make on your podcast, and I wouldn't make on my podcast. So there is a difference there, right? If you're interviewing me, Pete, and I say something you think is pretty wrong, you're going to, and I love you for this, you're going to call me out for it, and we're going to debate it and argue it. Politicians can't always do that. It doesn't work that way. It's the difference. I really saw this at DOJ. And I have a great example of it, but it takes 5 minutes. I don't know if we have 5 more minutes.
No, I have to go run to dinner. Yeah, but we'll pick up there next time because I think it's different. I think it's different. Academia, media, and politics and government.
I think it's different too. We don't have to lie.
Well, we have a different. We have a different goal. We have a different initiative. We have a different set of interests. I think. Well,
you heard. I did call most of them scumbags, and I apologize for that. But when I say they're lying, I'm not even necessarily judging all of their lies to be wrong. I'm just saying you have to be comfortable with lies to be an effective politician. And you don't have to be comfortable with lies to be a successful radio host or a plumber or law professor or mathematician. And that's the difference.
Ma'am, it looks like your drain is pretty clogged up here. I'm going to have to tear it up and build you a whole new drain. You know who I think is probably really dishonest? Exterminators. I don't trust them at all because you can come in and you could drop a few bed bugs,
I hate contractors so much.
But exterminators in general, if there's any exterminators listening, tell me you've never dropped a couple bugs. Tell me you didn't go to some old lady's house and drop a...
Do you hate exterminators more than contractors?
Tell me you didn't go to some old lady's house and who has a real phobia of mice and drop a pregnant mouse in there somewhere. Tell me you didn't with a backpack.
Oh, by the way,
the backpack full of peanut butter.
Have you watched Outlander?
Really making myself laugh about the games exterminators play.
Sorry, I'm changing subjects. Have you watched Outlander?
No, don't even know what it is.
So I want to pitch it because it's a Netflix thing. Takes place in... I don't want to give a lot of
You know how much time I spend scrolling through Netflix offerings and not choosing any?
Let me tell you why Outlander's a show you should
never find anything good on Netflix. Go ahead.
I put this on Twitter during the Super Bowl, and pretty much everybody who responded to me agreed. It's like
you tweeted something non-Super Bowl related during the Super Bowl?
Oh yeah.
Ballsy.
By the way, Joyce Carol Oates, author of 50 books, responded to a Supreme Court tweet of mine directly.
Oh wow.
And said it would be interesting that I think if we had a national referendum, we would abolish the Supreme Court and life tenure is terrible. That's what she said in responding to my tweet. I was
that's a good one.
Yeah, that's kind of good.
What is this Outlander thing? What are you saying?
So here's the reason to watch it. And Lynn and I agree on this. This comes from Lynn and Eric. So those of the people in the audience who are familiar with Lynn know they can trust her, whether they can trust me or not. It has the worst villain I've ever seen in any movie, TV show, or series ever.
Oh, wow.
It is the worst villain. In fact, I don't know of a second. I can't think of I think of villains. I can't even think of Pete, this guy is the actor is so impressive.
Huh.
And the evil is so intense. Lynn and I were like, diving into our pillows on the couch. We couldn't watch it.
Is he worse than Stephen Miller?
This villain is worse than Stephen Miller and Trump tied together times 10. I mean, it's unbelievable how bad this guy is.
He's probably actually not. He's probably not racist and sexist.
Well, actually, he played the actor. The actor is in The Crown. The actor plays the Queen's husband in The Crown.
Huh.
And a bunch of people responded to me saying they couldn't watch him in later shows.
Really? That's
because
like,
he's so,
I have a
so bad at this.
quick story. Did you watch Handmaid's Tale?
I watched a few episodes. I didn't get into it.
So one of the main actors is the main patriarchal, like, commander guy.
Yes.
I think name is the commander. Fred is his role.
Will you call me that from now on when I come on your show?
The commander? You got it.
Yeah.
But he is, he was at Sirius XM. Joseph Fiennes, I think his name is. Okay.
Is he the brother of Ralph Fiennes?
Yep. Rafe.
Yeah, great actor.
I think it's Rafe Fiennes. And anyway, so I see him in the hallway. And I'd been watching. I watched that horrible, scary show with Val. And I say, man, I'm sorry. I'm sure everybody says this to you, but I do have to know, what is the response when people see you in real life? Because as soon as I saw you, I wanted to murder you. And it was just interesting because he laughed and had a British accent that I wasn't prepared for. Yeah. And he said, it's a lot worse when I had the beard that the character had. But it was a really fun little exchange I had with him in the hallway there. I go, boy, it must be such a good role. You play it such an evil guy.
Nobody.
Then I asked him to have sex with my wife in front of me, which he thought was really outrageous.
Well, that goes to the villain in this guy.
Is that right?
Like 25 people responded in various ways to my tweet. No one took issue with it. Like, this is the worst villain I've ever seen anywhere in any movie.
You tweeted that during the Super Bowl?
Yes.
Wow.
I said while we're on a break.
There is no break because the commercials are to
Black
be watched.
Jack Randall is the worst villain I've ever seen.
Did you think of Springsteen commercial with its very overt Christian overtones? How do you bring people together and center on a rural white Christian location? No one. The hardest core Springsteen fans today are surprised and disappointed. No one's like, I'm done with him. But people are like, I'll let it go because it's Bruce. But what a dumb thing to do.
Do you know that many years ago, Billy Joel played at Rush Limbaugh's wedding?
Fine.
That devastated me.
Yeah.
That just devastated me. But he now identifies as a liberal, so I don't know what his deal is. Springsteen's different because Springsteen is an American. Billy Joel's big, but Springsteen obviously different. I thought it was weird. Like, didn't you think it was weird? I thouve it was weird.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's Bruce and his voice and his image is very powerful, but he doesn't usually lend itself. Lend himself to a commercial like a.
So young Pete, let me tell you something, young Pete. I'm 62, about to be 63, and he's older than I am, as is Billy Joel. And what I'm learning as I go through life is that as we get older, we get suckier.
How do you say? How do you mean? What do you mean? You feel like you are?
I'm kidding mostly, but I
don't think you are. I think there's some truth to what you're saying.
I think lapses of judgment are more common. I got to be careful here. I'm going to be killed again. I've been killed so often the last 3 months by saying things like this. I don't want to be killed again.
Moral judgment gets more compromised as you get older.
I don't know, moral judgment, but we're more unpredictable. Like people think you get into a rut, but which is true too. But I also think decisions. I mean, Pete, no matter how great Bruce Springsteen is or Billy, I took my girls and then to see Billy Joel last year right before the pandemic, or a little bit before the pandemic, and he gave a great show, not anywhere near as good as 30 years ago, but a great show. And he's 70 years old, so I'm not, Springsteen said. I mean, I think Mick Jagger is like 80, right, or something, and he's touring. But my observation is that, especially people with jobs that require serious, in the moment, intellectual energy and judgment, it gets harder, Pete. It does. I've made some even at 63 too. I've made some mistakes in the last few months that I wish I hadn't made. I got hit harder than I thought I should have been hit for them. Like that whole thing where I talked about the ACA case for dummies. I got killed for that. Killed for that. Maybe I should have known. Maybe 10 years ago I would have known.
I don't know.
10 years ago I would have known.
I think
maybe I would have known.
I don't know. I don't know what that's about, and I can't say anything about it. I don't know.
Don't.
As you get
come
older.
after you. They'll come after you.
No, I mean, I think it's important to stay in touch with what younger people believe.
But that gets harder to do.
We both have our daughters, you know. I mean, I think, you know.
By the way, okay, I got to end with one story. Sorry, I put it on Twitter. It was funny. So, my daughter Sarah is incredibly woke in the most positive way. She is LGBTQ rights advocate.
Mm-hmm.
She's a radical leftist, and she's very engaged in politics.
How old is she now?
13.
Mm-hmm.
And 13. And we were driving home yesterday from someplace, and I said to Sarah and Katie and Lynn, so who's going to watch the Super Bowl with me tonight?
Mm-hmm.
Come on, Dad. We're not going to watch that. It's football. It's stupid. And I said, no. It's Brady, and he's 43, and it's Mahomes, and he's a new Brady, and it's storylines, and it's commercials. It's all great. Dad, it's football. I'm not watching it. Then Sarah said, I'm a teenage girl. I'm not watching football. And I said, you sexist.
That's great. And how did she respond? You nailed her.
Yeah, she shrugged me off like I wasn't there.
That's great. Great story. I love it.
All right, my friend.
Eric Segall, everybody. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, my pleasure.
There he goes, Eric Segall. Say hello to him on the Twitter, where he's always very active, at eSpinSegall. Listen to his podcast, Supreme Myths, wherever you get your podcasts. And we talked for another 20 minutes because we always talk for long periods of time because we're great friends. And he's been a mentor and friend to me for over 10 years now. And I always love talking to him. And he always wonders why people care about our conversations. And it's because he's a smart guy who has an original thinker, and we just love him, and it's always great. So thank you very much, Eric Segall. Thank you very much for listening to today's podcast. I know it was a long one with two guests. So what do you think? Should I keep these under an hour every day? Is it overwhelming? Is it too much? Try to give you as much choice as you can every day, trying to produce as much content and information that can make your life richer and better and more educated and informed and enlightened every day. But I don't know, maybe it's too much. I'm thinking maybe I should keep the podcast to an hour. If you're still listening, you're the kind of person who really does care. And so I'd love your insight. And you should email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. But right now, it's John Carroll who wrote the music and lyrics and recorded this song. Check out all of John Carroll's music at johncarroll.org, JONCARROLL.org. Take it away, Johnny.
Better stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers to stand up. All right, band, stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
And now here is former President Lyndon Johnson in 1964 making a call to a clothing company in a call which has now become the stuff of legend. LBJ orders pants.
Hello? Hello. Mr. Hager? Yes, this is Joe Hager. Joe, is your father the one that makes clothes? Yes, sir. We're all together. You all made me some real lightweight slacks. He just made up on his own, sent to me 3 or 4 months ago. It's a kind of a light brown and a light green, rather soft green and soft brown. Yes, now, I need about 6 pairs for summer wear. Yes, sir. I need about 6 pairs to wear around in the evening when I come in from work. Yes, and I can send you a pair. I want them ½ inch larger in the waist than they were before, except I want 2 or 3 inches of stuff left back in there so I can take them up. I vary 10 to 15 pounds a month. All right, sir. So leave me at least 2.5 to 3 inches in the back where I can let them out or take them up, and make these ½ inch bigger in the waist. Make the pockets at least 1 inch longer. My money and my knife and everything fall out. Wait just a minute. Hello? Hello. Now, another thing, the crotch down where your nuts hang is always a little too tight. So when you make them up, give me 1 inch that I can let out there, because they cut me. They're just like riding a wire fence. These are the best that I've had anywhere in the United States. Right. But when I gain a little weight, they cut me under there. So leave me, you never do have much margin there. Let's see if you can't leave me about 1 inch from where the zipper ends, round under my, back to my bunghole. All right, then. So I can let it out there if I need to. Okay. Now, be sure you got the best zippers in them. These are good that I have. And if you get those to me, I would sure be grateful. Where would you like to send, please? White House. I just sure will appreciate this. I need it more than anything. And now, you give this boy the address, because I'm running for a funeral, and give him address just how to dress these trousers. So we'll send them to you. And don't you get the measurements out of them and add ½ inch to the back. Give us 1 inch to the pockets and about 1 inch underneath so we can let them out. In other words, you like just a little more stride in the crotch. Yeah, that's right. Yes, sir. Okay, here he is. I'm glad that you enjoyed the other. Okay, go ahead, please.